In this series, we've explored a number of characters throughout Elden Ring. Some have had plenty of item descriptions to draw their background from, while others have only had small snippets we've been able to use alongside contextual information to tell their story. Today's topics belong in the latter camp, as they're provided little to no explanation in-game. We can encounter these human mini-bosses on our journey, and they truly have no bearing on the story of the Lands Between as a whole. Even so, they each help to flesh out the players in this world, from the little we can learn about them during our battles. Today we are discussing Esgar, Priest of Blood, and Necromancer Garris, and seeing what we can learn about who they are and their motivations. Thank you for joining us for this week's Elden Lore. Whether this is your first time with us, or you've been enjoying this series as it quickly approaches its 1-year anniversary, we appreciate your viewership. If you enjoy this lore dive, please consider subscribing to the channel. YouTube's algorithm counts on likes, subs, and comments to boost smaller channels, so the more you interact with us, the larger this amazing community can grow. We read every comment and love talking to our viewers about the lore of this incredible game. Thanks again for checking out our content, and let's get back to these two minor players with major implications. Esgar, Priest of Blood, can be encountered in the Lanedale catacombs below the city itself. When traveling through the subterranean shunning grounds, we can find these catacombs just past the giant crayfish at the bottom of the area. Once we make our way through, we fight Esgar, who looks a little different from your typical follower of Mohg, the Lord of Blood. He wields the Reduvia in one hand, magic in the other, and fights alongside two bleed-inducing dogs. His strategy is clearly to let our blood as quickly as possible as an offering to Mohg. What makes Esgar different from his other followers is that while he does wear the sanguine robes, instead of their usual hood, he is adorned with the Great Hood, an item you would never expect to be associated with anyone having dealings with the Lord of Blood. The Great Hood is a hood far larger than the head it is meant to cover, a burial shroud of sorts for those who discover, at long last, the truth they sought. And it says, "Yes, surely this is the moon that young Rennala gazed upon." This item is clearly associated with Rennala, and the quote within implies someone else touched on the truths in the moon associated with her. But the part of the description we'd focus on is the area claiming that users of this hood found the truth they sought. Esgar is a bit of an enigma amongst the Sanguine nobles, as he has been assigned the title of priest, implying that he may rank more highly than your typical noble. He is the only in-game enemy aside from Mohg himself that can wield blood incantations against us, another indication that he harbors more knowledge than your typical follower of the Mohgwyn dynasty. The spells he wields can bolster this theory with their in-game descriptions. Swarm of Flies is a blood oath incantation shared from the Lord of Blood's power, and it tells us, the new palace of the Lord of Blood lies in a swamp of festering blood, and these flies are said to spawn from the excrement of that land. This implies that Esgar actually found his way to the Mohgwyn Palace, as we ourselves can only gain this spell by making our way there. He also uses Blood Flame Talons, a blood oath incantation granted by the Lord of Blood. Now knowing what we do about his armor, weapons, and spells, we can weave together a possible backstory. While it would be easy to assume that Esgar is tarnished, it's worth noting that he can't invade you as a bloody finger, and if he isn't a bloody finger, he may not have tarnished origins. This means he was not necessarily recruited by White Mask Vare, and could have been anyone before encountering Mohg for the first time. Somehow, through invitation or by chance, Esgar found his way to the Mohgwyn Palace, and upon meeting with Mohg, was granted the Blood Flame Talons and the Lord of Blood's exaltation. Now knowing a great truth he never knew he was seeking, that the Formless Mother, an outer god, guided Mohg's hand in creating his dynasty through blood, Esgar found his purpose and became a priest of the Mohgwyn dynasty. While he had no horns of his own, he saw a way to express his newfound allegiance and faith by donning the Great Hood. From here, he was stationed by Mohg within the catacombs, surrounded by omen, and stood guard over this place, spilling the blood of those who wandered in, defending the catacombs of his lord's domain. In our eyes, this path makes the most sense when it comes to determining how Esgar came to be our final boss within the twisted catacombs beneath Leyndell. Unfortunately, without more concrete information, we can't confirm our theory is correct. But what do you think of this enigmatic blood sorcerer? Our second topic for today is a character known as Necromancer Garris. This man is found within the Sage's Cave in the Altus Plateau, but if you've been exploring the land thoroughly before this point, encountering him in the cave will not be the first time you've heard his name. Below Stormvale Castle, where we can find a face connected to the remains of Godric the Golden, there's a teardrop scarab that holds the spell Rancor Call. This is a sorcery of the Servants of Death that summons vengeful spirits that chase down foes. Once thought lost, this ancient death hex was rediscovered by the necromancer Garris. Once we meet Garris, we find that he wields two weapons, one of which we'll discuss in a minute, and the other is the Prince of Death's staff, a staff embedded with sullied amber, said to be a very part of the Prince of Death, enhances death sorceries. One of the staves deemed heretical by the Academy for its ability to allow sorceries to be augmented through faith in addition to intelligence. This makes it clear that Garris has made a pilgrimage to the face below Stormvale, rediscovering Rancor Call and breaking off a piece of the Prince of Death to use in his study of necromancy. Garris wears the Sage's set, which sheds a lot of light on those who do with very little description. Attire of the wise sages who were deemed heretical, evidence that the wearer was driven from town. The only other sage we encounter wearing these robes is Gowry, but they seem to be considered heretical for different reasons. Gowry due to his study of the rot, and Garris due to his necromancy. When it comes to the heretical study of necromancy, Smowtown already has a very thorough breakdown of how the practice is connected to the Deathrite birds and predates the Erdtree itself. So for a deeper understanding of Ghostflame and how this all ties to Garris, we strongly encourage you to check out his video. But there is one angle of Garris' story we differ in our opinion of, and that would be his motivations. Garris carries a weapon known as the Family Heads. It is described as 3 bludgeoning copper heads attached to a handle by chains, signature weapon of Necromancer Garris, the heretical sage. The heads were made to resemble those of his wife and 2 children. Many believe that this implies Garris began his studies into necromancy due to the death of his family, looking for a way to return them to his side. But we believe this character is much more sinister than that. The skill associated with this weapon is called Familial Rancor, and the description of its usage reads as follows. Gently rattle the copper heads to summon vengeful spirits that chase down foes. The anguish of a spouse and children invites accursed wrath. Garris' family are described as vengeful spirits, and their anguish is what is harnessed to attack using this skill. In the time where Ghostflame rituals were the predominant form of death in the lands between, it's likely not everyone who died was left a vengeful spirit. In order for there to be peace in death, we have to assume that some laid to rest were not called upon to harness magic like this. The only knowledge we truly have about Garris is that he carries around a graven image of his family's remains, and uses their own spirits to attack. In our opinion, this information implies that Garris' family actually met their fate at the hands of Garris himself. His study of necromancy would have had them all shunned from their hometown and driven away. Now living in the lands between with no home, Garris, desperate to continue his study and needing a way to defend himself, turned on his family, making them fuel for his magic, and developing ways to use their spirits, hungry for revenge against him, as weapons against the dangers he would face. It could also be that his sacrifice of his own family to fuel his studies of necromancy are what outed him to his village as a heretic and had him exiled. Either way, if his family had died peacefully, why can we use the anguish of these dreadful spirits against our foes? Thank you again for joining us for this episode of Elden Lore. Sometimes the people we encounter in the lands between have so little background, it can be hard to piece together their stories. But we believe we've done a good job of shedding light on possible backgrounds for these two minor characters. Do you think we're onto something with our theory on Esgar's journey to becoming a follower of the Lord of Blood? Was Necromancer Garris a benevolent father looking to revive his wife and children? Or a monster who needed their vengeful spirits to fuel his studies? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss an episode in our Elden Ring lore series. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden Lore.